Okay, well, let's begin. First, we're going to remove the left front wheel. Make sure when you remove these, do it in an X pattern. You want to remove them just like when you tighten them in an X pattern. And see the rotor and the caliper. So today we're going to be replacing the rotors and pads. Melinda has a problem with the vibration. She's getting a high-speed vibration when she applies the brakes. She had brakes done at 30,000 miles, and the rotors were resurfaced at that time. Most of the times when the rotors are new, they cut back on the metal because they're trying to cut back on weight and everything, so you really don't have a lot to work with. So it's not unheard of to maybe happen to have the rotors replaced at the first brake job, or if they've been resurfaced once already, the next time you definitely have to replace them. All right, now we're going to show, if you're not sure if you need brakes and you get your wheel off and you want to check your brakes, loosen the steering wheel, remove the lock by turning ignition without turning it on, and it'll free up the wheel. And then we can look in, there's a little window here, and it'll usually give you a pretty good idea of how much lining that you have left on your pads. See the inside pad. We're going to talk about the complaint on this 2008 Outback. The complaint was a severe brake pulsation. And when you have a severe brake pulsation, usually you'll get a vibration in your brake pedal and the steering wheel will shake. And usually it happens at high speeds, slowing down. What's causing that is this brake rotor, the round disc. The round disc is warped, what they call warped. It'll have uneven high spots in it. Now this rotor was resurfaced at 30,000 miles, so there's not enough left to resurface it again. Plus, when you're taking it down to that minimum, more than likely you're going to develop another brake vibration because the rotors will warp again because of the amount of metal has been taken away. So we're going to be replacing the rotors and the pads on the Subaru Outback today. All right, now we're going to show you some of the components and the parts that we'll be working with. Here is the mounting bolts for the caliper mounting bracket. Now since we're replacing the rotors, we're going to have to remove the mounting brackets, one here and one here. The caliper mounting bolts, which is here and here, if you were just replacing the pads, you had no brake pulsation, you could simply just remove these bolts, take the caliper off without removing the mounting bracket. But to get the rotor off, we have to remove the mounting bracket, and that's these big bolts here. Up here is your brake bleeder. Usually these bleeders should have a little rubber on them. That helps keep the crud, the moisture out of these bleeders so they don't freeze up. We're going to be working with that when we bleed it. So that's the little cap that goes over there. And you should replace those and put those back. They're very important. Right here is your brake hose that goes down to your caliper that supplies the caliper with the brake fluid force to compress the piston. Back here we have to be very careful. Here's your electrical line for your ABS sensor. When you're working on this, you want to be very careful not to damage this. And as you can see, you have your drive axle and your suspension, your strut and everything. But today we'll be concerned about these mounting bolts. We have to get those off, and the caliper bolts to replace the rotor and the brake pads. Now we're going to loosen the mounting bolts. Alright, now we're going to loosen the caliper mounting bolts. We've already removed the bracket mount, we've loosened the bracket mounting bolts. We're going to loosen the caliper mounting bolts. Okay, we have the mounting bolts loosened for the caliper bracket and the mounting bolts for the caliper loose. We're going to remove the caliper mounting bolts. Sometimes these will spin. You may have to hold those with a pair of pliers. but these are coming off nicely. So we're going to remove those bolts. Now we're going to remove the caliper. Okay, now we will support the caliper, preferably with some mechanics wire or a bungee cord, because we don't want it to hang from the hose. It can damage the brake hose. That we don't want. So we're going to support it out of the way as we're removing the caliper bracket. Now we're going to remove the caliper bracket mounting bolt. And there's the mounting bracket. See, the pads are in place. You can actually get a good look at the pads now to really see how far down they've actually worn. We're going to spray the rotor and the hub area. A lot of times corrosion builds up and the rotors are difficult to come off. See, this rotor is not budging. They do offer some holes here that I'll explain later about removing. They're threaded holes, and you use an 8mm bolt to help pull the rotor off. I'm going to install our 8mm bolts to help remove this rotor, because this rotor is stuck on the hub. So there's threads inside this rotor, 2 8mm bolts, and you want to tighten these bolts up evenly. As they start getting tight, you want to go back and forth. This will loosen the rotor from the hub. It'll start to come off now. There we go. I just broke it loose. That's what they're used for. Now that we've removed the rotor, we've got to take a close look at the hub, because you'll build up a lot of rust and debris, pieces, particles of metal. This surface must be nice and smooth and straight. So you can take a wire brush or some emery cloth and clean this up real good. Because if you're mounting the rotor back on and there's a lot of debris on here, it's going to cause the rotor to be unparalleled. You're going to wind up with another brake pulsation. So this is very important to clean this hub area of any foreign. All right, we've got this surface clean. Just take a little brake clean. Get your parts supplier. Clean off the area. Make sure it's all free of debris, any kind of debris or rust. We've got this surface pretty clean and it's ready to accept our new rotor. Now we're going to remove the pads from the mounting bracket. If you're not sure about how they line up, just set them exactly how you took them out. We're also going to be replacing the anti-rattle shims. It's real important a lot of times to replace these, because from the heat these things will wear out. And underneath of here, in the bracket itself, it'll build up with rust and debris. This surface should be cleaned to accept the new shims. down in these little corners real good. Clean out the rust and the pad material. It's going to help you to get your shims in better. And if we don't clean this out, we're going to wind up having pads that are binding, and we don't want the pads to bind. We want everything to move freely when we get done with this brake job, so the brakes operate properly and don't bind. See, there's a lot of crud that builds up in this, and you want to get it all out. Another important part are the caliper slides. These are the caliper slides. A lot of people overlook these. These have to be nice and free. We're going to take them off. You can see there's grease up in here. We're going to clean out the old grease, and we're going to add new grease. You want to make sure these are free and clean, because if you don't, what's going to happen is your pads are going to wear out faster, or if it's completely bound up, you may not be able to get your caliper back together again. So you want to put some fresh, I use synthetic grease, caliper slide grease. Because you want these to be nice and free to give you your optimum wear out of your pads. Not cause a binding or a pulling sensation on your brakes. Alright, that looks good. We got them there nice and free and lubed and ready to go. As you can see, we have our pads laid out. We have different types. This type is thermally treated to help with brake burnishing. We'll talk more about that after you do the brakes. You have to burnish the brakes. We have the pads lined up. This brand of pads comes complete with all your shims, your pads, and your anti-rattle slide clips. This brand has the slide clips, but does not have the shims. A lot of times these shims can be reused. Sometimes these shims start to rust and pit, and they should be replaced. So it's a good idea, if you want to do the job properly, inspect and replace the parts as needed. Now we're going to install our new shims, not our new anti-rattle clips, I'm sorry. Our new anti-rattle clips are installed. Now we're going to install our shims.
Not ready for
Add some moly coat. Both surfaces of the back side of the pad. Install these shims first, the slotted shims. Then we'll install these shims, silver. Then we need a little bit more moly coat for the surface on the shim. Now we'll install our pads into the caliper mounting bracket. Now we're coming to the part of the caliper. We want to inspect the caliper first. We want to make sure these rubbers aren't leaking any fluid, brake fluid. If there's signs of fluid leaking, that means the caliper may be failing and has to be replaced. This caliper is nice and dry. These pistons, we're going to be pushing these pistons back to accept our new pads, because as the pads wear out, the pistons push out. So we have to push these back so we can get the new pads in, because the pads are a lot thicker than the old ones we took out. Another thing is, we want to make sure the surface where the pad rides is very clean. If there's any debris built up on there, it can cause a problem with the seating of the pads. Using brake clean to clean it, some of the rust and the brake particle from the ceramic pads, the old ceramic pads. And make sure the surface is free of debris and free of rust, so it'll accept and the pads will sit properly. Okay, that looks good. Now we're going to take one of the old pads, we're going to place it back on the pistons, and we're going to take our C-clamp and we're going to slowly wind in the pistons. Now if you have a problem when you're trying to push the pistons back where it's really tight, there's a problem with the caliper. Piston is probably galled and you'll have to replace the caliper. These should go back nice and smooth. This particular caliper is a 2-piston caliper. Some have 1 piston, some have 2. Corvettes, for instance, have a 4-piston caliper. As you can see, we've got the pistons back. They have to go all the way into their stops so to accept the new pads. Okay, we have our new rotor. We're going to check the surface with a clean cloth. We're going to clean it with some denatured alcohol just to make sure there's no oil residues on it. And then our new rotor, you can see the marks where the old rotor was. I usually like to try to put it exactly back on the way it was, even though it's a different rotor. Anytime you're working on automobiles, it's a good idea to mark things and put them back exactly the way they came off. So I'm going to line up the holes. Install the rotor. Alright, we got our rotor installed. Now we're going to install the pads and the mounting bracket. Alright, we've got the bolts installed. Now we need to torque the bolts, and it's very important to torque your mounting bolts and your caliper bolts to the manufacturer's recommended specs. Now we're going to install the caliper. Mounting bolt secure. Remove the bungee cord that was supporting our caliper. There's little slots on these slides that you have to line up. Make sure it all goes in properly. There we go. Make sure you tighten them by hand at first, because you don't want to come across a strip bolt by forcing it in. Alright, now we're going to tighten the caliper mounting bolts. We're going to set our dial indicator for the specific manufacturer specifications. This particular torque wrench, you can hear when it releases, you'll hear a little click. Okay. Got the rotor mounted. We'll put some lug nuts on here. Calipers mounted. Now we're going to install the pads.
Chuck Brett, Dustin Brett's father, worked for a Ford dealership. So he had this guy down here.
As you can see, with the caliper mounted to the spindle, it's much easier to put the pads on this way.
We had there on the he charged him on the way he didn't fix it. And he took it out to Town Park. That's a Ford pickup.
We're going to soak the bleeder. We're going to be bleeding the brakes. We're going to show you one-man operation how to bleed the brakes with the bleeding device. We're going to soak it with some penetrator. A little trick, sometimes when these things get galded up, sometimes you can give them a nice shot on the top, and it'll help loosen up the bleeder, especially when the car's got quite a bit of mileage on it. Alright, we got the bleeder loose. Going to install our tube onto the bleeder. Now we have our self-bleeder hooked up. This is for doing it by yourself pretty much. We're going to open the bleeder and we're going to watch until the tube runs clear. Bubbles will come out and you're going to be pumping the brake pedal until all the air is removed and straight fluid comes through. So we loosened the bleeder, went inside, pumped the pedal until the fluid was coming out of the tube, no more air bubbles. Then we shut the bleeder back off. That's one method of bleeding. With a helper, you can have your helper inside to bleed the brakes. Then once you've pumped the brakes up, you'll open the bleeder and you have your assistant push the pedal down so your fluid will come out and remove all the air. Now when you have two people and you're bleeding brakes, you have one person inside, one person out at the wheel. The person inside is going to put pressure on the brake. Doesn't have to go crazy, just light pressure on the brake. The person outside is going to open the bleeder. The person inside is going to let him know when the bleeder goes, when the brake pedal goes all the way to the floor, so he can close off the bleeder. You let up. He opens the bleeder. You push down. He closes the bleeder. You let up. You'll do this about 3 or 4 times to get any trapped air out of the system. You want to make sure after you're done with the brake job that you top off your brake fluid. There's a maximum and minimum line on this brake fluid. Also, on a lot of units, there's a float in here. So when the brake fluid goes down to a minimum level, it'll actually turn the light on in the dash. Make sure you fill it up to the maximum mark. Don't overfill it. Get it right on the maximum mark if you can. Alright, since we used a professional style hoist lift, we're going to show you where the jacking points are if you're to do this in your driveway. The jacking points for the Subaru are right here. Now you do have a small jack in your vehicle. You could use that, but I recommend putting a jack stand underneath of it once you do get it up. Jack stand underneath, right at your point. Release your jack. That's much safer than just having a jack holding it up by itself. And usually the jacks they give you for emergency use aren't quite as durable.